In the world of old money and sprawling Connecticut estates, I was always a footnote in my own family story. The daughter of Harrison Vance, the CEO who could move markets with a whisper. But I was the wrong daughter, the quiet one from the first marriage, a constant reminder of a past he'd rather forget. It all came crashing down with a single text message from him. We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. They thought they could erase me, freeze my accounts, throw me out, and watch me disappear. But they made one mistake. A big one. They forgot about a secret my grandmother left for me in her will. They thought they were locking me out of their house. They didn't realize they were living on my land. What would you do if you held the power to evict your own family? Subscribe to follow my journey of revenge as I dismantle their empire, piece by piece. If you're ready for some satisfying drama, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you think my first move should be. The screen glowed with the words that severed my life in two. It wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, digital execution delivered to the palm of my hand. I stood before the cold iron gates of the Vance estate, the manicured lawns of Greenwich, Connecticut, mocking me from the other side. A light rain began to fall, slicking the stone griffins that guarded the entrance. They looked as unimpressed with me now as they always had. The text was from the contact, simply labeled Father. It read, "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. No, dear Avery, no, I'm sorry. Just a cold, factual statement." A period at the end of a sentence that was my life. A tremor went through my hand, not from the chill, but from a surge of something hot and volatile. I took a steadying breath, the air tasting of wet asphalt and old money. My shock was quickly hardening into something else, something sharper, something useful. My thumbs moved over the keyboard, my own reply stark against the gray message bubble. How funny how brave they think they are, haha. I didn't feel like laughing. The haha was a shard of glass, a promise. I turned my back on the gates, on the sprawling Tudor mansion that had been my cage more than my home, and walked away. That night, I checked into a motel off I-95. The kind with a flickering neon sign and the lingering smell of stale smoke and despair. As I lay on the lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, I replayed the fight. It wasn't about the boy I was seeing or the classes I was taking. It was about a spreadsheet I shouldn't have seen. A file detailing the charitable donations from the Vance Corporation Foundation, our family's philanthropic pride and joy, and the strange, circular path the money took, ending in offshore accounts that had nothing to do with charity. I had confronted him. My father, Harrison Vance. I had accused him of stealing from his own foundation. He hadn't bothered to deny it. He'd simply looked at me with those cold, assessing eyes and told me I had no idea how the world worked. It seemed he was now giving me a practical lesson. The threadbare carpet of the motel was a universe away from the Persian rugs of my childhood, and the distance sparked a memory. A flashback was a luxury I couldn't afford, but my brain served one up anyway. My father, Harrison, was a CEO in his own home, a man who measured affection in performance reviews and family dinners that felt like board meetings. Everything was about control, about the pristine image of the Vance name. Then there was Genevieve, my stepmother, a woman sculpted from marble and social ambition. She never raised her voice, but her quiet, passive-aggressive barbs could flay you alive. To Genevieve, I was a relic of Harrison's messy first marriage, a constant, inconvenient reminder of the woman she replaced. Her son, my half-brother Spencer, was the heir apparent. He had our father's ambition but none of his discipline, coasting through life on a wave of charm and family money. He was the golden boy. I was the quiet, watchful girl in the background. "Don't be so dramatic, Avery," he'd said with a smirk when I tried to show him the spreadsheet. "It's just business." My real mother, Catherine, was a ghost in that house, but a vibrant one in my mind. She was warmth, integrity, and the source of my moral compass. The foundation was named after her, the Catherine Vance Foundation for the Arts. That was the deepest cut. They weren't just moving money. They were desecrating her memory. She had been an artist, a woman who believed in beauty and truth. The Vances believed only in the bottom line. This fight wasn't just about money. It was about her. The next morning, reality hit with the force of a physical blow. I tried to buy a coffee and a bagel at a diner, and my debit card was declined. A quick check of my banking app confirmed my fears. Account frozen. They hadn't just locked me out of the house. They had locked me out of my life. Panic, cold and suffocating, seized me for a full minute. Then, the fire returned. I wouldn't let them break me. I drove to a pawn shop in Stamford, the bell above the door announcing my defeat. I took off the one piece of jewelry Genevieve had never been able to convince me to part with, a delicate gold bracelet with a single, small diamond charm. A 16th birthday present from my mother. The pawnbroker gave me $500 for it. It felt like selling a piece of my own soul, but it bought me time. For 3 days, I lived in a haze of cheap coffee and furious planning. I researched tenant rights, corporate law, anything I could think of. It was all a dead end. They had all the power, all the resources. I had $500 and a crumbling sense of hope. On the third day, sitting in a public library, a desperate, long-shot idea came to me. I looked up the number for a Mr. Sterling. He was my maternal grandmother's estate lawyer, a kind, semi-retired man I hadn't spoken to in a decade. It was pathetic, grasping at straws, but he was the only connection I had to my mother's side of the family, to a world before the Vances. Mr. Sterling? It's Avery. Avery Vance. Avery. My goodness, it's been years. How are you, my dear? He asked, his voice a welcome warmth. I'm in a bit of a situation, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I know this is a strange question, but was there anything at all left for me from my grandmother's estate? A trust, a fund, anything? He was quiet for a moment. That's a good question, Avery. The Vance family assets were all quite separate, as you know. But let me pull the old files. I'll see what I can find. Give me a day. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. It was the first glimmer of light in 72 hours. The email landed in my inbox that afternoon. The sender's name made my blood run cold. Julian Croft. He was my father's top lawyer, a legal pit bull known for tearing his opponents to shreds in court. The subject line was 2 words, urgent matter. My hands trembled as I opened it. I was expecting a cease and desist letter, a threat of a lawsuit for slander, something to intimidate me into silence. But the message was short, and bizarrely, it sounded like he was the one with the problem. Avery, we have a problem. A significant one. Call me immediately. It didn't make sense. We have a problem? Since when was I part of his we? I stared at the message, reading it over and over. This was a trap. It had to be. Taking a deep breath, I stepped outside the library and dialed his number. Croft, he answered on the first ring, his voice clipped and strained. Julian, it's Avery. I got your email. Yes, he said, and I could hear the forced calm in his tone. Avery, I need to know your current intentions regarding the estate property in Greenwich. My intentions? I asked, confused. My intentions are to figure out why my family threw me out and froze my assets. There was a pause. I could hear him shuffling papers. This is a delicate legal matter, Avery. Their actions may have inadvertently created a complicated situation. For them. He wouldn't say more. He just kept repeating that it was imperative we speak further, that I should retain legal counsel of my own. I hung up the phone, my head spinning with more questions than answers. What complicated situation? What had they done? My phone rang again an hour later. It was Mr. Sterling. His voice was completely different from the day before. The gentle warmth was still there, but now it was underpinned by a current of sheer, unadulterated excitement. Avery, he began, I have the most remarkable news. You found something? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Oh, I found something, my dear. Your grandmother was a very, very shrewd woman. She never trusted Harrison. Not for a second. She knew he married your mother for her name and her connections. He took a breath, and I could practically hear him smiling through the phone. When she died, she didn't leave you a trust fund. Harrison would have found a way to control it. She did something far more clever. She left you the deed to the land the Greenwich estate sits on. All 40 acres of it. I sank onto a library chair, my mind reeling. The land? Not the house. Precisely. The house is a fixture on the land. In her will, she established a trust that allowed Harrison and his family to reside in the house, on your land, under one very specific condition, that the property would always be considered a welcoming home for her direct blood descendants. Namely you. The pieces started clicking into place, forming a picture so stunning it took my breath away. Mr. Sterling delivered the final, glorious blow. Avery, when your father sent you that text message, when he formally and textually denied you access to your home, he violated the core tenet of the trust. He voided it. The house is worthless to him without the land it sits on. Legally, as of 3 days ago, your family are residing on your property as trespassers. Julian Croft's panicked voice echoed in my ears. We have a problem. A significant one. It was their problem. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. A slow smile spread across my face.
It was a real one this time.
They thought they took my home. They just handed me the keys to their kingdom. The game had just changed. And I was about to make my first move. The next 48 hours were a blur. I spent my dwindling cash on a train ticket to New York City and a cheap prepaid phone. My research led me to a list of law firms, but I ignored the big, established names, the ones my father had on retainer or played golf with. I was looking for a shark, not a seal. I found her in a sleek, modern office in a downtown skyscraper, a world away from the stuffy, wood-paneled law firms of my father's world. Her name was Sophia Ramirez. She was young, maybe 30, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing and an energy that vibrated with ambition. She listened to my entire story without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished, I slid the pawn shop receipt for my mother's bracelet across her glass desk. This is all I have for a retainer right now, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She pushed the receipt back toward me. Keep it. My payment will be the satisfaction of watching Harrison Vance squirm. Consider this a professional courtesy. A slow, predatory grin spread across her face. Avery, people spend their entire careers looking for a case with this kind of leverage. This isn't just a property dispute. This is a corporate takeover, gift wrap. We spend the next 3 hours mapping out the strategy. An immediate eviction was tempting, a sledgehammer blow. But Sophia was more refined. We don't want them out of the house yet, she explained, pacing in front of a window that overlooked the city. We want them rattled. We want them to know we hold the deed, and by extension, their fate. We'll start with a formal notice to cure or vacate. It's a legal scalpel. It gives them 30 days to cure the breach, which is impossible, as they can't unkick you out or vacate the premises. It forces them to the table. I felt a surge of adrenaline. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I was planning an attack. The notice was served 2 days later. I wasn't there, of course. Sophia had arranged for a professional process server to handle it. I sat in a bustling coffee shop in Brooklyn, nursing a single cup for over an hour, my leg bouncing with nervous energy. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Sophia. It's done. I closed my eyes, picturing the scene as she described it. The main boardroom at Vance Corporation, on the 50th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. Polished mahogany table, panoramic city views. My father, Harrison Vance, at the head of it, commanding, powerful, in the middle of a quarterly earnings review. Then, the quiet interruption. A man in a simple suit entering the room, apologizing for the interruption. He would walk directly to my father and place the crisp legal envelope squarely in front of him. I could imagine the flicker of annoyance on Harrison's face, the confusion from the other board members. I could see him slicing it open with a letter opener, his expression shifting from irritation to disbelief, and then to a deep, simmering rage as he read the legal language that declared him a trespasser in his own home. The first shot had been fired, not at the gates of the estate, but in the heart of his empire. The public humiliation, right in front of his board, was the point. It was a message. You are not untouchable. A feeling of grim satisfaction settled over me. This was just the beginning. The call came that evening as I was eating a container of cheap takeout in my motel room. The caller ID flashed Spencer. I let it ring 3 times before answering, taking a slow, calming breath. Hello, Spencer. Avery? What the hell are you doing? He started, his voice a mix of confusion and his usual arrogance. Dad is going to bury you for this. A notice? Are you insane? It's a legal matter, Spencer, I said, my voice even and cold. I was proud of how steady it was. A legal matter? We're family, he sputtered, the irony apparently lost on him. Just stop this, okay? Tell your little lawyer to back off. Dad he'll let you come home. We can forget this whole thing. The time for that is over, I said calmly. His tone shifted, the faux magnanimity dissolving into a panicked plea. Avery, come on. You're making Genevieve crazy. The lawyers are talking about this is a real problem. Just tell us what you want. Is it money? I'll talk to Dad. I'll get you some money. I almost laughed. They still thought money was the answer to everything. This conversation is inappropriate, Spencer, I said, using the kind of corporate speak they would understand. Have Julian Croft call my lawyer. Her name is Sophia Ramirez. I'm sure a man of his resources can find her number. Before he could respond, I hung up. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding. The thrill of turning the tables on him was intoxicating. That pathetic phone call was proof. They were scared. The property is our leverage, Sophia said the next day in her office. It's the battering ram. But the foundation, that's the payload. Sophia's legal mind was a beautiful and terrifying thing. She explained that because their breach of the trust directly related to family matters, we could argue that we needed a full financial picture to assess damages and intent. We had a legal hook to demand discovery, to get our hands on the internal financial records of the Vance Corporation and, most importantly, the Catherine Vance Foundation. Within a week, we had hired a forensic accountant, a quiet, meticulous man named Arthur Penn. He looked more like a librarian than a financial detective. In a small, windowless conference room, we spread out the initial documents Sophia had managed to legally compel. They're arrogant, Arthur murmured after hours of silence, pointing to a series of wire transfers. They didn't even bother to be creative. Money from the foundation goes to an art acquisition company, which then buys a sculpture at an inflated price from a holding company, which is owned by your father. He's essentially using the foundation as his personal piggy bank. I felt a cold fury. He was using my mother's name to enrich himself. Every document Arthur uncovered, every hidden account he flagged, wasn't just evidence. It was another bullet in the chamber, ready for the war to come. They caved and requested a meeting a week later. We met on neutral ground, a sterile conference room in a downtown law firm that smelled of money and ambition. Harrison, Genevieve, and Julian Croft sat on one side of a large glass table. They were the picture of power and privilege. Genevieve offered a tight, reptilian smile. My father's jaw was set so hard I was surprised it didn't crack. Avery, Julian Croft began, his voice smooth as silk. Your father and Genevieve are prepared to be exceptionally generous to put this unfortunate family misunderstanding behind us. He slid a portfolio across the table. Inside was a proposal for a $5 million trust fund and the deed to a luxury condo in the city. A clean break. A silencing fee. I didn't open it. I pushed it back across the table. I'm not interested in your money. The air crackled with tension. Harrison's eyes narrowed into slits. Then what do you want? He snarled, dropping the pretense of civility. I looked directly at him, channeling all the years of being dismissed and ignored into a single, focused point. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It had 2 lines typed on it. A voting seat on the board of directors of Vance Corporation. Full, independent oversight of the Catherine Vance Foundation. Harrison stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. Then he looked at me, his face turning a shade of purple I'd never seen before. Genevieve let out a small, horrified gasp. You insolent girl! Harrison roared, slamming his fist on the table. You think you can blackmail your way into my company? Into my boardroom? You don't have a company if you don't have a headquarters, Harrison, Sophia interjected calmly. And right now, your headquarters, your home, and your public image are all sitting on my client's land. My father was speechless, his rage so immense it seemed to choke him. He looked at me, truly looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see anger. I saw fear. Sophia stood up. Those are our terms. You know how to reach us. We walked out, leaving the three of them sitting in the silent, sterile room. The air outside was cool and crisp, and for the first time since I'd received that text message, I felt the chill not as a threat, but as a promise of the winter I was about to bring to their lives. Julian Croft's official reply came via email a day after our negotiation. It was as arrogant as I expected. My clients will not be extorted, it read. We reject your client's ludicrous proposal in its entirety. We suggest she reconsider our previous, generous offer before she does irreparable damage to her own future. Irreparable damage, I said, reading the email aloud to Sophia in her office. He has no idea. Sophia smirked. Time for phase 2. We didn't go to a tabloid. We went to a Pulitzer Prize-winning financial journalist at the Wall Street Journal named Sarah Jong, known for her tenacity in untangling complex corporate schemes. Sophia's office sent an anonymous, encrypted tip, not the whole story, but a single, verifiable thread, the public tax filings for the Catherine Vance Foundation versus a leaked shipping manifest for an overpriced sculpture bought from a shell corporation. It was just enough to light the fuse. 2 days later, the story broke online. The headline was cautious, but the implications were clear. Questions arise over Vance Foundation's charitable spending, links to CEO's private holdings scrutinized. It wasn't an explosion, but a crack running through the marble facade of the Vance empire. The company's stock dipped 3% by closing time. The siege had begun. The story sent ripples of panic through my family's world. The first sign came from my only remaining ally on the inside, Maria, our former housekeeper who had retired a year ago but still kept in touch with the current staff. She had been more of a mother to me than Genevieve ever was. They are fighting like cats and dogs, Mija, she told me over the phone, her voice a low whisper. The staff hears everything. Genevieve is furious. She screamed at your father that he was an arrogant fool, that he should have just paid you off and made you disappear. She cares more about the invitations to the Met Gala than anything else, and now she's afraid they'll be pariahs.
And Spencer?
He is a ghost, Maria said. He just paces the veranda, smoking cigarettes, yelling at his stockbroker on the phone. He sees his inheritance turning to smoke. Harrison, she said, was like a caged bear, roaring at everyone, isolated in his study, making furious calls. The perfect family portrait they presented to the world was shattering under the first real sign of pressure. I felt a cold, sharp satisfaction. I wasn't just taking their house. I was taking their fantasy. The 30-day notice period expired on a crisp autumn Tuesday. The deadline passed with nothing but stony silence from Julian Croft. Sophia called me that morning. It's time, Avery. This is the point of no return. Do we file? There was no hesitation. Yes. By noon, it was done. The lawsuit was filed in Connecticut Superior Court, Avery Vance versus Harrison Vance, Genevieve Vance, and Spencer Vance. It was a public document. A declaration of war. The media frenzy was instantaneous and immense. The previous story about the foundation was an appetizer. This was the main course. My phone, which had been quiet, began to light up with alerts from news apps. Forbes. Vance CEO sued for eviction by own daughter. New York Post. Billionaire's home wars. Heiress wants dad evicted from CT mansion. CNN. A family feud of epic proportions. Inside the Vance legal battle. I was no longer an anonymous source. My name and my story were everywhere. They used an old society photo of me, smiling awkwardly next to my father at some charity gala. He looked proud. I looked trapped. Now, I was the one setting the trap. Backed into a corner and publicly humiliated, my father did what he always does. He fought dirty. He couldn't attack the facts of the property deed, so he attacked me. Sophia got the call from a source. Harrison, through Croft, was preparing to petition the court to have me declared mentally incompetent. Their angle was vile and personal. They would argue that my erratic and vindictive behavior was a sign of long-term instability, a delayed reaction to my mother's death, and that I was incapable of managing my own affairs, including the multi-million-dollar property I now controlled. Their plan involved bribing a psychiatrist with a reputation for being flexible to provide the diagnosis they needed. But they miscalculated. The doctor they chose was either more ethical than they assumed or simply smart enough to recognize a career-ending trap. He recorded a phone call with Croft's associate, the one where a hefty donation to his clinic was promised in exchange for the desired medical opinion. He sent the recording to Sophia. She called Julian Croft immediately. "Julian," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "I have a recording of your associate attempting to bribe a medical professional to falsify a diagnosis of my client. My next call is to the district attorney's office to discuss witness tampering. Unless you'd like to reconsider your client's position." The silence on the other end of the line was, she told me later, the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. Harrison's desperate lunge had backfired spectacularly. He had just handed me a gun, and it was loaded with criminal charges. The news of the failed, and potentially criminal, bribery attempt was the final straw for Spencer. He was a weak man, not a hardened one. Public shame was one thing. The prospect of depositions, federal investigations, and potential jail time was another thing entirely. He cracked. I received a text on my burner phone from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Alone. I have what you really want." I knew it was him. I agreed to meet, but on my terms, a crowded cafe in Grand Central Station midday. I sat at a small table, my back to the wall, watching him approach. He looked terrible. His skin was pale and clammy, and his confident swagger was gone, replaced by the furtive, twitchy movements of a cornered animal. "They're going to lose everything," he whispered, not even bothering with a greeting. He went too far. "The bribery thing, we could all go to jail." "That sounds like a you problem, Spencer," I said, taking a sip of my water. "I can give you the proof," he said, his eyes pleading. "The real proof. Not just the breadcrumbs your accountant found. Everything. The unredacted emails between Dad and the offshore banks. The real ledgers. The smoking gun, Avery. Everything you need to bury him." He slid a small, black flash drive across the table. "I want out," he said, his voice cracking. "My name dropped from the eviction suit. A guarantee that you won't implicate me in any of this. I'll testify against him if I have to. Just get me out." He was offering to sell out his own father to save himself. It was the most pathetic and most powerful moment of his life. I looked from his sweaty, terrified face to the small piece of plastic and metal on the table. It was the weapon I needed to end the war. I picked it up. The flash drive was a tactical nuclear weapon. Sophia arranged one final meeting with Julian Croft. She didn't make threats. She didn't raise her voice. She simply opened her laptop, connected it to the conference room monitor, and showed him one single email thread from the drive. It was from my father to his offshore banker, explicitly discussing the creative reallocation of foundation funds to cover personal investment losses. It was dated a week after my mother's funeral. Julian Croft, a man who had built a career on unshakable composure, went pale. The professional mask didn't just crack, it disintegrated. He knew what a jury would see. He knew the game was over. The call from my father came 2 hours later. His voice was unrecognizable, a thin, reedy sound stripped of all its commanding baritone. There was no rage left, only the hollow echo of defeat. "What do you want, Avery?" he asked. It wasn't a question. It was a plea. "You know what I want," I said, my own voice devoid of emotion. "Call the emergency shareholder meeting. Announce your resignation. Cede the foundation to an independent board that I will appoint. You will make a public statement taking full responsibility." There was a long, static-filled pause. Then, a single, whispered word. All right. The king had abdicated. The emergency shareholder meeting was held in a large, sterile auditorium buzzing with nervous tension. Harrison, flanked by Genevieve and Julian Croft, looked like a wax figure of his former self. He stumbled through a short, humiliating speech, citing pressing personal reasons and the need for a new direction as his reasons for stepping down. He then introduced me as the interim chair of the board. I walked to the podium, the flash drive feeling heavy in my pocket. The room was expecting a quiet, awkward transition. I had no intention of giving them one. "Thank you, Harrison," I began, my voice clear and amplified by the microphone. "However, I feel the shareholders deserve a more transparent explanation for this new direction." A shocked silence fell over the room. Before anyone could object, I nodded to a technician. The screen behind the stage, which had shown the Vance Corporation logo, now displayed the first of my father's incriminating emails. A collective gasp went through the audience. For 10 minutes, with cold, surgical precision, I laid out the truth. I showed them the ledgers, the offshore accounts, the emails. I exposed the rot at the core of the company, not with anger, but with undeniable facts. I wasn't just an avenging daughter. I was a whistleblower saving the company from the man who was supposed to be its guardian. When the last exhibit vanished from the screen, I paused. "This is the company my father built," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "Today, we begin building a better one. One worthy of my mother's name." I laid out my plan for restructuring, for transparent governance, for a new foundation that would be a beacon of integrity. When I finished, the silence was broken by a single person clapping, then another, and then the entire room erupted in applause. It wasn't for me, not really. It was for the promise of a future they could believe in. I looked at my father. He was staring at the floor, a completely broken man. A week later, I walked through the Greenwich mansion one last time. The movers had come and gone. The rooms were vast and empty, filled with an oppressive silence. Without the opulent furniture and carefully curated art, it was just a building, a cold, impersonal collection of spaces. Ghostly outlines on the floors and walls marked where sofas and paintings had been for decades. I ran my hand over a chip in the marble mantelpiece in the library, a relic from a clumsy childhood moment. I stood in the doorway of my old room, where faded patches of wallpaper betrayed where my posters used to hang. These were the artifacts of a life, but the memories attached to them were now tainted, recontextualized by the ugly truth. I had won. The house was mine. The land was mine. I held the deed in my hand. But standing there, in the echoing emptiness, I felt the profound weight of my victory. I had exorcised the ghosts, but in doing so, I had burned down the very idea of home. 6 months later, my life was unrecognizable. I was no longer an heiress in exile, but the chairwoman of the board of Vance Corporation. My days were filled with meetings, strategy sessions, and the hard work of rebuilding a company's culture from the ground up. I sold the Greenwich estate. I couldn't bear to live in a monument to my own revenge. The past was a place to learn from, not a place to live. The massive proceeds from the sale were funneled into a new entity, the Catherine Vance Arts Trust. Its mission was simple: to fund the kind of bold, emerging artists my mother had always championed. One afternoon, I visited its first project, a vibrant community arts center in the Bronx. Watching a group of kids laughing as they splattered paint on a canvas, I felt a sense of purpose that all the money and power in the world couldn't buy. This was real. This was honoring her memory. I wasn't just destroying what was rotten. I was building something beautiful from the ashes. That night, I sat in my apartment. It was a modern loft in the city, with high ceilings and a wall of windows overlooking the endless river of lights. It wasn't grand or imposing. It was simply mine. While unpacking an old box of belongings, I found it, my first prepaid phone, the one I'd bought in the first few days of my exile. Out of curiosity, I charged it. When it powered on, I navigated to the old text messages. There it was, the conversation that started it all. "Father, we changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore." Me, "How funny how brave they think they are, haha." I stared at my own reply. At the time, it had been a raw, defiant hiss into the void. A bitter, sarcastic laugh. But now I saw it differently. It wasn't the laugh of a victim. It was the unconscious premonition of a victor. It was the dark, ironic humor of a cornered animal finally realizing it was the lion all along. A real smile touched my lips. It held no malice, no lingering anger. It was the quiet, confident smile of a woman who had faced her past, dismantled it piece by piece, and built a future on her own terms. I put the old phone away, turned to the glittering city skyline, and got back to work. And so, the war is over. I have the company, the power, and a future I built myself from the ashes of my past. They tried to take my home, so I took their entire world. Justice was served, but the silence in my new life is a constant reminder of the cost. Thank you for following my story from beginning to end. Now, I have one final question for you, a loose end that I'm still debating. My brother, Spencer, betrayed our father to save himself. He handed me the weapon I needed to win. So, what is his final fate? Does he deserve a second chance for doing the right thing for the wrong reasons? Or should he pay a price for his cowardice and all the years he stood by and did nothing? I want to see your verdict. Let me know in the comments. Type mercy if you believe he's earned his freedom, or type payback if you think justice isn't finished with him yet. I'll be reading every single one.